Gary Barker. Thanks for being with us
Sure.
here on the 51% YouTube channel. First of all, tell us a little bit about your organisation, Promundo.
Yeah, we've been around for 17 years now. What we do is try to engage men and boys for achieving gender equality, violence prevention, getting men involved in caregiving, sexual and reproductive health and HIV prevention, with a perspective that we don't achieve full equality for women unless we engage men and boys, and that men and boys' lives get better if they embrace gender equality. Yeah.
How hard is it, though, as a job to do something like that, to change a mindset?
Yeah. Sometimes it's to get it to the policy level, to get it to happen at a big scale is a challenge. To get individual men to change is not always all that tough. A lot of men, if they can stop and think and reflect to their own lives, it's pretty obvious to them that these notions of masculinity just don't work. If they're able to kind of take a deep breath and reflect about it. The big challenge is, how do you scale that up? How do you scale that change up? There's a lot of men who already get that some of this doesn't work, and they're willing to be spokespersons for it. But what the big prize for us is getting it into the school system, the health sector, the workplace, getting policies for whether it's paternity leave, for men's health, for adequate prevention resources around gender-based violence. So we're, of course, supporting survivors. But how do we also say we need to go upstream and understand where the violence comes from?
And certainly a summit like this should help, shouldn't it?
Yes, and I think so this is fantastic that there's been so much acknowledgement of we've got to do something with boys and men. The challenging part becomes we have to end the impunity, but we're working in countries including Congo, including Burundi, Rwanda, Brazil, where a quarter to a third, sometimes as many as half of men have carried out some form of physical violence against a partner, and up to 1 in 5 have carried out sexual violence. So you can't lock up all those men. The impunity needs to be, it's a system, not that it's in and of itself not enough. We've got to figure out how we take this anger about sexual violence and conflict and turn it into deeper prevention that says we must start with boys and with girls and embed it into schools and provide parent training and build the institutions that can stem the tide, as opposed to always being reacting to that violence.
So is it a case of both legislating as well as allowing it to change organically? I mean, how do you do that?
I think it's legislating and provoking cultural change. That is, there's some change happening organically, but we think it's possible to provoke cultural change. We've seen how, men's participation in childbirth, for example, in some parts of the world, or in the care of children, there's been a cultural shift. There's cultural shifts all the time. We think you can provoke it as well, right? By getting, whether we get media, we get social marketing campaigns, we get local gatekeepers, so not only the kind of the policy level here with the Ministry of Health, but you also train healthcare workers to say, a woman comes in, she's pregnant, we want the husband here. And while he's here, we're going to screen for violence. And while he's here, we're going to provide training for the couple around childcare and nonviolent ways of raising children. So it's working at the legislation, but then also doing kind of all the institutional levels to provoke the cultural change.
And are you positive that something will come out of this gathering?
I think the attention is already there, and I think the funding from some of the key governments signing on to, we're taking this issue seriously. We are, whether it's the International Criminal Court and other spaces or at national level, that we're taking this seriously as a criminal justice issue and a rights issue. I think the question mark remains, and a support for women and men survivors of violence. I think the question mark remains, do we have clear enough ideas, and do we also say we want to take it to the next level and say we're going to do the adequate prevention work so it doesn't happen in the first place? So that to me is the big next step of how to go beyond reacting to the problem to say we have some ideas of what we do to make sure it doesn't happen in the first place.
And are you confident that you'll be able to implement those ideas?
There's enough fantastic civil society groups here. There are governments, some rebuilding from conflict that need lots of help for a long time. Others have shown that, yes, we can. Rwanda's an example of a recovery. Now, that's a recovery of 20 years. It may be somewhat exceptional. Even some parts of the Balkans, we can look and say it is possible to rebuild social institutions and achieve change. Civil society groups working together with government. There's a few bright lights in the world that we can look and say, yes, we can recover from this, and yes, we can implement prevention.
And at all times also bring about gender equality.
Yes, and that it's got to go together. I think the other part is as we look at the name of this event around ending sexual violence and conflict, to say sexual violence wasn't invented by conflict. It happens happens in countries that aren't in conflict, obviously. So the gender equality lens, the power, the patriarchy, all those things that have to be taken on, that's not just in Congo or Syria or the Balkans, right? That's everywhere. So absolutely. And I think it's easy to get lost in the urgency of this issue and forget that the big power and patriarchy looming over us.
Gary Barker, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.